First, thank you for inviting me and giving a talk today. I'm going to speak about Uyghur Islam and state control policies in Xinjiang. Hope you will forgive my poor English and my French accent. So, if you understand, you don't understand what I say, don't hesitate to raise your hand. My research is focused these days on the study of ideological thinking. And I try to explain through the scope of political science and cognitive psychology, sociopsychology, or cultural anthropology, why people think what they think. And I'm trying this day to apply this to the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, but also to the policies the Chinese state is implying in the region. So I wanted to make a few preliminary remarks before giving my talk. I won't speak too much about concepts and theoretical frames, but when you investigate on this question of control of the region by a modern nation state, you have to bear in mind a few concepts. Among them, the concept of modern scientific state, it's an expression of Anthony Smith. We describe the modern state, which aim is to rule in a scientific way, its population, and for that he needs to homogenize them. So for scientific state, cultural homogenization, is one of the main features in the policies it's implied. Second concept, very important, is the concept of legitimacy. Modern nation state makes the models of legitimacy evolving. Traditional state, political legitimacy is often linked to religion. In modern scientific state, nation is the basis of legitimacy. So you have to be the nation. So the state is the incarnation of his nation. And so I spoke about it. Third important feature, the question, there's a orthographic mistake, the question of cultural homogenization. So that's what I said. States need to make people think they share common sets of cultural values or history. So, second preliminary remark is dealing with the specificity of the relation between politics and Islam among the Uyghurs. Yes. We have to make a kind of dichotomy between the Hui world and the Uyghur world. I'm speaking under the surveillance of my eminent colleague Drew Latney, so that will, I don't know if we confirm what I say, but in Chinese-speaking Islamic world, there is a kind of equilibrium or win-win relations between Hui Muslims and the Chinese states. I simplify, but the Hui national identity has developed in a quite symbiotic relation with the Chinese national identity. And Hui don't have any separatist aspirations. And they are Muslims, but Chinese Muslims. But the data of the problems are quite different in the Uyghur Turkic world. The Uyghur are Turkic-speaking population. So they feel they belong to another cultural world, Central Asian, Turkic-speaking world. They feel they have a distinct history. Sorry, I forget my slide, but I just wanted to, well, I will speak about that later. But, no, I wanted to say just that they feel they belong to another cultural world. And they have the idea that their history, their different history from China. So in that respect, Turkic-speaking population developed a modern national identity in symbiosis with a modernist reformist movement called Jadidism or Pan-Turkism. And it has started developing just before or in the same time of Chinese nationalism. So in a way, they might get perverted by those alternative ideology, because Jadidism is an anti-colonial ideology. Second difference, because of this distinct history, they have also they had at the beginning of the 20th century different models of political legitimacy, inherited from the Genghis Khanate times and from the theocratic Sufi state that was set up in Xinjiang, in modern-day Xinjiang, around the 17th century. And fourth specific point, when the Communist Party arrived in Xinjiang, it doesn't have a very strong militant basis. I mean, you have communists in Xinjiang at the time, but those communists are pro-Semitic, and some of them are also in anti-colonial logic. So because of all of that, and the strong and the influence of antagonistic forces, CCP has to face the defiance of, as I said, jihadist, modern Turk nationalist, I mean the jihadist. Has to face also in the early 50s the opposition of some anti-communist war chiefs such as the Kazakh Osman Batur or other people. And also they've got to face the opposition, especially in southern Xinjiang, the opposition of the conservative Islamic establishment. I mean clergymen, but also Sufi leaders, Ishan, etc. etc. So my point is to think about the way the Chinese Communist Party has tried to transform Islam in Xinjiang, Uyghur Islam, which is quite subversive and anti-Chinese state, into a patriotic Islam. That's the big deal these days, turn Uyghur Islam into patriotic Islam. So to make that, we will see that the Chinese state has developed a juridic apparatus defining what is illegal and illegal religious activities. Those illegal religious activities, cover practices and diffusion of interpretations of Islam incompatible with Chinese Communist Party ideological frames and policies. I just give you a few examples of what is bad Islam. You can see some members of the Turkish Islamic Republic movement in the 30s. Sufi and especially Orthodox practice of Islam also threatened. You can see the worst is when Islams get involved in politics. And you heard about those movements in the 90s in southern Xinjiang, such as the East Turkestan Islamic Party and the Jihad in Bahrain. Of course, Islam also was involved in the Yining Shutian in 97. And of course, all of you heard about, especially of the last one, about Hassan Marsoum, who was this person who has set up the East Turkestan Islamic movement in the margins of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Okay. So the point is the Chinese state doesn't want that. Well, I'm French, and the question of ruling Islam also in France starts being now a current issue, especially with the war in Syria. You heard about the fuss we had in France when the Sarkozy president decided to ban the burqa from some public places in France. And now we are facing, the Chinese state is facing another problem, which is the involvement of young French fighting in Syria. So this is not a specific problem of authoritarian states. Democracy also has to face those problems. So I'm trying now to work to compare the way Western democracies such as French try to solve the problem and how the Chinese states does. And this is the good Islam. We will see that the Chinese Islamic Association has to play a role for the Chinese state. We will see also the role of the Islamic institutes the Chinese state has set up all over China. So I will try to periodize the state's strategies aimed at putting Islam under control in Xinjiang. So we have distinguished 4 periods with different sets of policies aimed at trying to put clergymen or Uyghur believers under control. Maybe the first period is the 50s, when the states, the Chinese communist states, tried to break symbolic and economic links of dependence between the Islamic establishment and the masses. So the thing is, Uyghur clergymen, through the system of the Waqf, had vast land possessions in southern Xinjiang, and they were, of course, making peasants working for them. So they were a kind of interdependence between them and the peasants. And the law, the agrarian reform, allowed the Chinese state to break this link of dependence between the Islamic establishment in the south of Xinjiang and the masses. They also forbid, for example, the Islamic taxes. At that time, the second axe of the policies was to put Uyghur clergymen under control. So they just tried, because we will see the second period arise quickly and they changed the strategy, but the idea was to make Uyghur clergymen economically dependent from the state. So the way of remunerating paying the clergymen has changed. I mean, from now they are paid by the authorities, and that's a way of co-opting Islam and co-opting clergymen and co-opting the good clergymen. So, and especially at that time, those who are really targeted by the state are all the people who have been involved in political activities before the arrival of the Communist Party or during the arrival of the Communist Party. Maybe you heard that in the region of Khotan or Yangon in the mid-50s, there were a lot of troubles involving some local Sufi sects and some local leaders there. So that was a way to starting getting kind of control on the situation. Just one minute. Do you have to finish at what time?
I don't know, you have 7 minutes.
Okay, yeah, that's well, the second period, I won't develop that much because everybody heard about that. It started after the anti-rightist movement and maybe more after the Great Leap, is the period of frontal attack against Islam. So the setting up of a collectivized life through the, we say in French, commune populaire, the popular commune, I don't know what we say in English, allowed the state to control the everyday life and, of course, the practice of religion. So they tried to break that link between the people and Islam, who is perceived by the Chinese state as something subversive in Xinjiang. It's different. So actually, the persecution, the fight against Islam starts before the Cultural Revolution in Xinjiang, actually. But it culminates during the Cultural Revolution, where the practice of Islam is totally forbidden. You can put you in jail. So those policies changed in the 80s. The reformers who take the power in hand understand that they have to reconquer the minority supports, because the Cultural Revolution, the persecution, and religious persecution, and all kinds of persecution made the minorities losing confidence in the Chinese leadership. So they tried to, Chinese Communist Party is still atheistic, but it recognized in the constitution the liberty of religion, of practicing a religion. And they tried to set up a model of secularized society, but quite a flexible one, with spaces of freedom. And so they allow the local population to, again, to practice religion, and this leads to a movement of revitalization of Islam in Xinjiang, you know, with the rebuilding of mosques. publication of books dealing with Islam, translations of books dealing with Islam coming from abroad, etc., etc. The problem is there's at the same time the development of non-registered Quranic teaching, and inside some of those Quranic schools, talibs start, students start asking for an evolution of society and the setting up of social-political order more focused on Islam. Actually, it's a way to put again the Uyghurs at the center of the model of modernization. Of course, they were in mind that they wanted Islam to provide frames from living and etc. But it was also a way to say that the Uyghur had to be at the center of this model of society. So the thing is that those peoples get politicized and sorry, I go back to my former slides, and especially in the madrasa in southern Xinjiang, in the Kargili area, and it's very interesting when we study the core members of the East Turkestan Islamic Party or the small Islamo-nationalist group that appeared in the 90s. Many of them were from that madrasas in Kargili, especially the madrasa of Abiki Maksud, who was somebody quite revered at that time, and who had been purged after the Barin incident because the authority was thinking that he had bad influence on the students. So to finish, I will speak about the policies today. Sorry, I'm getting lost in my presentation. Yeah. Okay, so last slide. So we are coming back today to more rigid secularist policies. That means the state is closing the space of expression of religious practice you could have in the 80s. I wouldn't say liberal, but they were wider than today. So the state is, that's a new phenomenon, very interesting. We can see now the profusion of text laws passed by the central government, the region, in order to define precisely what is a legal or an illegal practice of religion, and especially of Islam. So that means they define which religious practices are allowed, and as usual in Xinjiang there's a special feature. Sufism it's more difficult for them to get registered, and because when to practice a religion you have to practice in a place registered by authorities, and authorities prefer to register mosque than khanakas, etc., etc., and also because of this theory of subversion of Uyghur Sufis. So it's those texts control of course the teaching of Islam with the closure of those non-registered Quranic schools, and now they are replaced by the Islamic institutes, and the one Rumchi is forming new imams who are supposed to be patriots, and the education is focused on the legitimizing the state, and etc. That makes some people say that you study more Marxism, Leninism, or the sort of or the lines of the parties than current inside those institutes. And just to last remark. So maybe I've got a map here. You can see the map of those official institutes now whose mission is to deliver the proper reading of Islam in China. So you get several of them all over China. And the Xinjiang Islamic Institute is based in Hongqi. The problem is often the youngsters complain that there are not so many places, I mean, not so many students who are recruited by this institute, and they feel sometimes the teaching are not so interesting, and second, they cannot apply for it. So this is yes, posters denouncing illegal religious activities in Xinjiang. I've taken those pictures from the recent report of the Uyghur Human Rights Project, the pictures taken in Xinjiang. So restriction also at the mosque entrance, you have to, for example, children cannot enter mosque, women neither, etc., etc. So yes, I just finished saying that the Islamic Association in Xinjiang have been revived during the 80s, and it was playing quite a role of middleman between the believers and the state. And now, because of those new rules and those limitations around the practice of Islam, and also the lack of confidence between the state and the members of the association of the Xinjiang branch of the Islamic Association of China, they try now to shortcut it. It's very self-evident. When you go, for example, to Eastern China, for example in Nanjing, you can see that this association plays an important role monitoring the relationship and controlling the religious practices. And when you go to Xinjiang, what is very interesting, it depends sometimes on the oasis or the city, but often they are shortcut by the administration. I mean, often the offices of religious affairs. So maybe my last word is the problem is, in a way, this policy starts being a bit counterproductive, because some Uyghurs, when they see that they cannot beer the beer, or the woman cannot invade into public places, they feel they are discriminated because of their religion. And of course, we have the same problem also in France. That's very interesting. And second problem is now the imam, considering that they're very controlled by the state and the discourse is very monitored, they cannot play anymore this role of middleman between the society and the state. And maybe this can also explain some of those bursts of violence we have evoked this morning in southern Xinjiang. Because now there's no way for the believers or the youngsters to make their complaints get heard by the state, because they don't have the middleman anymore that will play that role. Thank you for listening.